Welcome back to the deep dive. You gave us a monumental stack of sources this time, a really detailed policy doctrine.
It's a lot, I know, but it's focused on something huge, not just incremental change, but total systemic reconfiguration.
Right, and that's what we're getting into today. We are deep diving into this proposal for an African economic and ecological modernization sphere, or African EEMS.
And the premise is it's incredibly compelling. The sources argue that we're not just facing a bunch of separate problems, climate, food, the economy. It's a convergence of systemic crises. They're all linked. They're all symptoms of a development model that's just, run its course.
So that's our mission for this deep dive, to really unpack this proposed solution. And the doctrine is very clear. This EMS isn't just another fund or another program.
No, not at all. It's a structural redesign. It's about how ecological restoration, economic development, and finance are meant to interlock from the ground up.
They're literally trying to rewire the entire operating system.
That's a perfect way to put it. That structural view is absolutely vital. The authors are diagnosing a failure of the whole structure.
Okay, so they're saying for decades we've just been treating the symptoms.
Exactly. The underlying model, which separates economic numbers from ecological reality, is the thing that's fundamentally broken. They call this the unsustainable trajectory.
Let's dig into that diagnosis then, because the sources make a really provocative claim right at the start. They say climate change is actually a symptom, not the root cause.
Right.
So if it's not the primary driver, what is the core structural failure they're identifying?
It's this deep structural imbalance where our economic success has become, almost entirely contingent upon ecological decline.
Right.
The prevailing model has always treated nature, soil, water, the atmosphere, as this infinite resource or an infinite trash can. It's always external to the core economic math.
The result being depletion without regeneration.
And critically, wealth without physical anchors.
Well, let's stop there. Wealth without physical anchors. For you listening, what does that actually look like in the real world? Are we talking about like abstract financial instruments?
Precisely. It's when the growth you see in finance completely outstrips the verifiable physical productivity of the land, of the energy systems, of the labor that's supposed to sustain it.
So the value is just detached from reality.
And the system becomes brittle, it's prone to failure. The EMS doctrine is all about reversing that detachment.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly for their corrective framework. If the system is misaligned, EMS introduces these three foundational principles to basically snap economy and ecology back together. What are those cornerstones?
So the first, and this one is pretty radical, is the principle of nature as infrastructure.
Nature as infrastructure.
Forget thinking about environmentalism as a charity or just a compliance cost. In this model, soil, forests, water cycles, they're all viewed as strategic national infrastructure, just like a port or a highway or a power grid.
That immediately changes the whole investment equation. If you're investing in an asset that generates long-term returns, like a rail line, it's totally different from just paying to mitigate a liability.
Exactly.
So what's the second principle, the one that guides their climate approach?
The second is reframing carbon as a managed resource. Traditional climate policy, it treats carbon as a pollutant, a liability you have to get rid of.
Right.
EMS sees atmospheric carbon as a material flow that you have to actively manage. You can capture it, remove it, stabilize it, and in that process, actually create valuable outputs.
I really like that shift. It moves from just playing defense to active stewardship.
Yeah.
So what's the third principle? It seems like this is the one that ties it all back to the economy.
It is. The third is finance anchored in physical reality. This just means that any economic instrument has to be directly linked to something verifiable, something measurable and physical.
Like what? What are we talking about?
We're talking about concrete metrics. Tons of carbon sequestered, hectares of land restored, megawatts of clean energy generated. It anchors value back in the tangible world.
Okay, so those are the principles, the philosophy. Now let's get into the operational architecture. The sources lay out two flagship systems that work together to form the physical core of EMS. Let's start with the one for carbon and energy, Emission Zero Global, or EZG.
So EZG is designed as large-scale, climate-critical infrastructure. It's not just a single factory, it's a whole system that integrates biological carbon sink, think very fast-growing, engineered biomass, with advanced conversion tech.
Okay, walk us through the mechanism simply. How does it pull carbon out of the air and turn it into stable assets and energy?
So the first step is just high-volume photosynthesis. The biomass grows incredibly fast, pulling CO2 from the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
That biomass is then harvested and it's subjected to controlled thermochemical processing. Think of it as a really sophisticated, precise way of turning that organic material into stable forms.
So instead of letting it rot and release the carbon back again?
Exactly. It's converted into stable products, mainly something called biochar.
Biochar, which is basically a highly stable form of carbon, almost like charcoal, that can be stored in soil for thousands of years. But what about the energy part?
Well, that thermochemical process, it could be pyrolysis or gasification, it also generates a huge amount of renewable heat and synthetic gases.
Which can then be turned into electricity or fuels.
Correct. But the crucial part is that the carbon that went into the system is now stabilized in the biochar, which is a long-term storage asset. The energy you get on top of that just offsets fossil fuels.
And this is where the economics just completely flip. The system's output isn't just, we polluted less. It produces energy, a stable carbon asset, and fiscal revenue all at the same time.
Yes. So carbon removal stops being a net economic cost and starts being a productive commercial activity.
It aligns energy security with climate stability.
That's the goal.
So EZG handles the carbons and the energy. But the foundation for all of it is the land itself. So let's look at its partner system, the OASIS system, which focuses on what the sources call the invisible crisis land and soil degradation.
Yeah, land degradation gets overlooked so often in these global debates, but it's a primary driver of food insecurity, of poverty, of climate vulnerability. OASIS is designed to restore millions of hectares of degraded land and turn them back into productive, self-sustaining ecosystems.
Why is soil treated as strategic climate infrastructure here? We always hear about rainforest, but not so much about, dirt.
Healthy soil is arguably the most critical piece of infrastructure we have. It does three strategic things at once. First, it's a massive carbon reservoir. It holds way more carbon than all plants combined.
Wow.
Second, it's a water buffer. It's like a sponge. It regulates water, reduces floods, and keeps crops alive in dry spells. And third, it's a biological reactor that drives the nutrient cycling that lets us grow food.
And degraded soil just loses all three of those functions.
It becomes inert dust. OASIS is about reversing that.
Okay, but we've all seen restoration projects that just fail. The funding runs out and it all goes back to desert. What makes this permanent?
This is a key concept they use: permanence through biological feedback loops. The system isn't sustained by constant intervention, like endless irrigation. It's engineered to cross specific ecological thresholds.
Thresholds like
what? Like a minimum density of vegetation or a continuous network of roots in the soil.
And what happens when you cross that threshold?
The ecology takes over. The soil starts holding its own moisture, microbes thrive, which makes more nutrients available, which supports stronger plants, and so on. The regeneration becomes self-reinforcing. It becomes biologically self-regulating.
So it can persist for decades without constant external subsidy.
That's the design.
So the synthesis is pretty clear. EZG captures and stabilizes carbon while generating power and economic output. OASIS restores the land and water cycles you need for that biomass to grow. It's a closed-loop system.
It's a move towards a coherent, national-scale industrial ecology, not just a bunch of fragmented projects.
Let's transition to the money, the financial mechanisms. This all requires massive long-term capital, but the doctrine is adamant that it has to be done without increasing sovereign debt or privatizing national assets. How on earth do you account for all this?
This is where they introduced their tokenized accounting and settlement architecture. And it's really critical to say this right up front. This is not a speculative cryptocurrency.
Okay, good, because that's where my mind went. If it's not Bitcoin, what is this digital infrastructure actually doing for the state?
They define it as a digital public infrastructure for the state, or DPIS. Think of it more like an incorruptible, transparent, auditable spreadsheet. It's an administrative layer that sits under the economy and is completely subordinate to national law and central banks.
And its function is to just track everything.
It provides real-time, rule-based accounting of tangible outputs, the exact quantity of carbon removed by EZG, or the volume of water stored by OASIS. All verifiable.
What's the policy advantage there? I mean, it sounds incredibly complex. And that brings me to a key question. Does the doctrine address the implementation risk? I mean, trying to deploy something this sophisticated across multiple nations seems like a huge vulnerability.
It's a very valid concern, and the sources do spend a lot of time on governance. The DPIS is actually designed to mitigate those risks, especially corruption, by automating transparency.
How so?
Because the economic activity, biomass growth, energy generation is digitally recorded and linked directly to a physical asset, it strengthens the state's fiscal capacity.
So it makes the tax base clearer and harder to evade.
Exactly. When value creation is accounted for instantly and transparently, you can have automated, verifiable revenue distribution. It enhances the state's control, and it also introduces a concept they call sanction resilience.
Tell me more about that. How does an accounting system make you resilient to sanctions?
It's about maintaining sovereign control over the value accounting layer itself. By linking your national financial flows directly to domestically verified physical assets energy, restored land using an infrastructure you control.
It becomes much harder for external actors to disrupt those flows through financial coercion.
Precisely. The ability to transact based on your own verifiable physical production stays under national authority.
That really reframes sovereignty as functional control. Let's connect this back to the most critical strategic asset for any state, which is securing its population. How does ESS tie all of this back to food security and social stability?
Well, the framework treats food security as a primary objective, not an afterthought. The land restored by OASIS doesn't just store carbon, it becomes a vast domestic food security buffer.
So you get stable, climate-resilient food production. You're less reliant on those volatile global supply chains.
And that has a direct impact on rural livelihoods. Absolutely. By aligning ecological restoration with job creation and stable income, think of the skilled labor needed to manage EZG and OASIS sites. It acts as a powerful stabilizing force.
You're mitigating migration pressure and conflict by addressing the root causes.
Instead of just treating them as humanitarian crises after the fact, food security in this model is a direct product of resilient infrastructure and good governance.
This all sounds like a complete redefinition of what state capability even means. So let's look at the broader implications. The final chapters of the doctrine really suggest a new definition of power and governance.
They do. They introduce this concept of sovereignty reinterpreted for the planetary era. And the argument is that true sovereignty isn't just about borders or currency anymore.
It's about functional capability.
It's about your functional capability. The capacity to secure food, to ensure energy independence, to guarantee ecological stability, and maintain economic resilience.
So if a state can't regenerate its own ecological base, it is structurally vulnerable, no matter what its flag looks like. Regenerative capacity becomes the new measure of modern statecraft.
That is the core strategic synthesis, yes. By building these integrated systems, the EMS framework argues for the dissolution of what it calls false trade-offs.
The old development versus environment argument.
For generations, policy has been stuck there, or growth versus climate responsibility.
But what this demonstrates is that when systems are correctly designed, development and planetary stability aren't competing goals. They actually reinforce each other.
The entire policy logic just shifts. It moves from managing scarcity and extraction to governing regeneration and restoration.
The role of the state revolves.
From managing decline to cultivating systemic long-term balance. It's about building the physical systems that can actually change our civilization's trajectory.
That is a powerful and exhaustive analysis. So let's provide the final key takeaways for you, the listener. The African EMS doctrine proposes a system designed to fully anchor finance in physical reality with that DPIS.
And to treat carbon as a managed productive resource as critical infrastructure through EZG.
And to transform land and soil restoration into sovereign public infrastructure through OASIS, which leads to genuine food security and economic resilience.
It's a complete move away from the fragmented incremental solutions that have really defined climate and development policy for the last 50 years. It's a move toward a coherent systemic synthesis.
And this leads us to the final provocative thought the sources raised about leadership in this new era.
It does.
The doctrine suggests that future generations will judge leadership not by GDP growth statistics, but by whether societies preserved the conditions for life, acted with foresight, and chose regeneration over exhaustion.
That is the new standard of success for modern sovereignty.
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.